Look at this room. This is the White House Correspondents Dinner, captured just after 8:30 p.m. Hundreds of guests fill the ornate ballroom, eating and talking. In security terms, a space like this represents high-density vulnerability. You have severe crowding, limited mobility, and the primary protectees, the President and First Lady, seated at a visible, centralized position on stage. During this phase, which protection details call a static state, the operational posture is observational. The perimeter is set, the guests are seated, and the agents monitor the room for anomalies. This analysis deconstructs the mechanical sequence of a kinetic security response. To understand how this works, we have to measure a specific metric, the physical time delta. That is the number of seconds between an external perimeter breach and the internal tactical intervention. In those crucial seconds, a gap emerges known as informational asymmetry. The attackers and the security detail know a lethal event is underway, while the civilians in the room lack any context for the sound. A crowded social environment relies on the illusion of safety. Because the crowd cannot physically defend itself, the protection detail must execute its response protocols with zero latency to maintain survival. The incident originates right outside the venue. An armed individual is sprinting toward the exterior security checkpoint, intending to breach the secure zone. The attacker is carrying a shotgun. This weapon profile presents a lethal short-range threat and generates a loud, unmistakable acoustic signature when fired. Secret Service agents stationed at the perimeter identify the weapon and return fire, executing their lethal force engagement protocols immediately. The physical threat is neutralized outside within seconds of the initial sprint. This creates a stark spatial division. The engagement happens at the hard outer perimeter, while the soft interior of the venue remains physically isolated from the violence. This diagram maps out the event space. You can see the spatial separation between the exterior checkpoint, where the physical breach occurred, and the interior ballroom housing the guests. The breach initiates right here, marked by this flashing red point at the checkpoint. Simultaneously, these blue vectors represent the perimeter agents collapsing on the threat to stop it. The physical danger is stopped at the door. However, the gunshots generate an uncontrolled acoustic shockwave that bypasses the physical walls and carries the noise inside. Returning to our blueprint, watch these concentric rings radiating from the exterior. This is the acoustic signature of the gunfire. The sound echoes through the building, breaching the structural envelope of the ballroom. Inside, no one immediately registers the sound as gunfire. To the guests, it sounds like something heavy has fallen. This delay in understanding is cognitive lag, a predictable psychological phenomenon in untrained populations when faced with sudden, violent stimuli. The human brain attempts to make sense of the noise by applying familiar environmental schemas. People assume they are hearing plates crashing or catering equipment tipping over, not a shotgun. This processing loop affects everyone in the room. Even the primary protectees on stage pause to register the sound. This split timeline illustrates the gap. On the top, the civilian OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, drags on as the crowd tries to process the noise. On the bottom, the pre-programmed tactical reflex of the Secret Service registers the threat and reacts instantly. This creates a window of vulnerability lasting several seconds before panic sets in. During these seconds, the protection detail's obstacle is not the neutralized shooter. It is the delayed reaction and confusion of the crowd surrounding their protectee. Interior agents execute their spatial response protocol without hesitating. They do not wait for the crowd to understand the situation, nor do they wait for instructions from the stage. Looking at the blueprint again, we see the coordinated response. Blue vectors representing armed agents flood into the main room from every entryway at the same time. Their mechanical objective is singular: collapse the interior perimeter to form a protective ring around the primary target on stage. As they move, the agents have to contend with a deteriorating environment. The room is getting louder as confusion turns into fear. To slice through the noise, the detail deploys verbal dominance. From every entrance, agents shout a uniform command: "Get down." This phrase serves a precise psychological purpose. It forces immediate physical compliance, bypassing the crowd's slow cognitive lag. Grounding the civilian population also yields a physical advantage. By forcing guests and servers to drop to the floor, the agents lower the crowd profile. This clears sight lines across the room, allowing for rapid threat identification and cross-coverage. Dynamic ingress and verbal dominance act as engineered mechanisms. They are designed to manually override environmental chaos and seize operational control of the room. In seconds, the social environment shifts into a tactical lockdown. Fear spreads. Guests begin diving under tables and pulling out phones, driven by raw reaction. This diagram captures the contrast in posture. The crowd is reduced to static dots seeking cover beneath the tables, while the blue agent vectors remain upright and moving with purpose. In this compromised network, the standing agents operate as the sole active controlling nodes. This reveals the core methodology of executive protection. Operational success does not require preventing chaos. It requires executing mechanical precision while surrounded by it. The protection detail establishes command and control, while the rest of the environment is still struggling to process the initial sound. Survival in a kinetic event comes down to a mathematical margin, the few seconds where trained reflex outpaces human confusion. This diagram shows a building footprint. Those nodes represent the highest concentration of the nation's leadership gathered in one place. The moment a hostile node breaches that outer perimeter, the timeline shrinks. The margin for error instantly drops to zero. To survive a zero-margin event, the Secret Service activates a specific, pre-programmed doctrine, the bifurcated tactical response. At the sound of gunfire, the operation forcefully splits into two completely separate missions. Outside, one team moves to neutralize the threat. Inside, an entirely different team works to make the targets vanish. There is no cross-chatter, no pausing to assess the situation or wait for orders. Both units execute their specific maneuvers simultaneously. The entire protocol relies on this strict compartmentalization. If the extraction team stops to look at the shooter, or the assault team turns back to check on the president, the defense crumbles. Outside the ballroom, the situation escalated immediately. The moment the first shots rang out, the exterior environment turned kinetic. Secret Service agents on the perimeter intercept the gunman as he moves toward the building. They deploy overwhelming physical force to neutralize the threat within seconds, stopping the advance before it reaches the ballroom doors. While the primary threat is engaged, secondary officers focus on securing the hallways. This brings them to civilians caught in the outer rings, including CNN anchor Wolf Blitzer, who had just stepped out of the ballroom. Before Blitzer can react to the gunfire, an officer forcefully pushes him to the ground, shielding him and instantly removing him from potential bullet trajectories. He was rushed into a restroom with others, hiding, waiting, not knowing what was happening. The exterior protocol prioritizes momentum disruption over information gathering. The goal is to stop the attack while aggressively flattening the surrounding area to clear the field of fire. At that exact same second, a radically different scene is unfolding inside the ballroom. The head table is cleared instantly. Agents physically swarm President Joe Biden, creating a dense, moving human shield around him. This extraction relies on raw kinetic speed. The security detail pushes forward so rapidly the president visibly stumbles as they rush toward the exit. The protocol scales to multiple targets without dropping a beat. Vice President J.D. Vance was pulled away. Others nearby were separated and escorted out. Within moments, all top-tier assets are locked down in predetermined secure locations, severing their physical connection to the compromised building. The interior protocol disregards optics and situational awareness. It relies instead on the raw physical force required to rip the assets out of the threat environment. Back in the ballroom, the primary targets are gone, but the room remains under high alert conditions. A secondary sweep protocol begins. Coordinated teams of tactical agents move aggressively through the remaining attendees. Security teams moved fast, communicating, calling names, pulling people from the crowd. The ballroom falls into a whispering silence. The only movement comes from tactical teams navigating the crowd, as the realization of the breach begins to set in. As name after name is called, the number of high-level officials being pulled from the crowd reveals the concentration of vulnerability that existed just moments before. The security board was cleared before the room even had time to process the danger. The survival of the targets didn't rely on split-second improvisation, but on the mechanical execution of a bifurcated protocol designed to respond to a failing perimeter. The immediate threat was contained, the suspect was taken into custody, and the inner security perimeter held without a breach. The individual had arrived armed with multiple weapons, prepared for a sustained engagement. During the exchange of fire, a Secret Service agent was shot. The agent survived. The standard-issue bulletproof vest absorbs the impact, preventing a fatal injury. This resolution demonstrates that current close protection protocols and ballistic armor are capable of neutralizing an armed threat before it reaches the principal. As the threat was neutralized, security expanded. A hard perimeter was established, locking down the entire surrounding area. During the lockdown, the president was immediately evacuated and relocated from the site. Minutes later, the president was secured inside the White House. Speaking later from the briefing room, the president described the moment as unexpected, but praised the response of the security teams. He characterized the operation as fast, decisive, and effective. The speed of this specific extraction ensured the principal was clear of the site before the secondary perimeter was even fully established. For those inside the ballroom, the experience was not a clinical tactical success. For them, it was personal, defined by fear, confusion, and shock. As the room slowly returned to movement, people stood up, shaken and struggling to process what had just happened. Phones came out almost immediately as attendees began sending messages and making calls to account for their safety. For the First Lady, the event was deeply unsettling, a reminder of the physical risks that accompany power. The final report confirmed the event ended with 0 mass casualties and no breach of the inner perimeter. However, the message remains that even the most secure locations are not immune to the threat of sudden disruption. It serves as a reminder that regardless of the tactical outcome, it only takes seconds for an environment to be permanently changed.